Hi everybody, it's Travis, Pagan Scholar, and this is going to be an episode of Tarot and Poetry. We are almost done with this series. This is going to be the video for The Magician. If you're new here, I actually started with the last major arcana card and went backwards because one of the best ways to learn something is actually to memorize it backwards. So yeah, we're almost at the end of it. All we have is The Magician and the Fool, so let's get started. I'm going to be doing this a little bit differently. Normally I go through the classical interpretation, my interpretation, and then emphasize my interpretation with a poem, but I'm going to instead actually still go with the classical interpretation, then the poem, then my reasoning why. So, using our authority, Benabel Wind Holistic Tarot, we read about the Magician. The theme of the Magician is power, specifically power of the mind. The card upright indicates the use of power, often creative mental power, for constructive purposes. This card is about personal greatness, about mastery over the physical, mental, and spiritual. The Ouroboros, or serpent snake, coiled around the magician's waist symbolizes his affinity to the soul of the world, the universal unconscious. The magician is worldly, knowledgeable, and self-aware. He manifests self-mastery. He possesses a strong bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. That's kind of where I'm at with this. I agree with all of her interpretations. She also makes this really interesting case between, is the Magician a card of active energy or receptive energy, between yang and yin, and she gives a lot of evidence to state that the Magician is actually yin energy, is actually receptive energy, through a bunch of key metaphors and symbols that are inherent in the Magician. So yeah, I agree with this. This card is about self-mastery, about personal greatness. However, I am going to read you Learning the Trees by Howard Nimrov, and I'll kind of unpack this poem with the Magician in mind, and you'll kind of understand what I talk about whenever I talk about the Magician. Before you can learn the trees, you have to learn the language of the trees. That's done indoors out of a book, which, now that you think of it, is one of the transformations of a tree. The words themselves are a delight to learn. You might be in a foreign land of terms like samara, capsule, drupe, legume, and palm, where bark is papery, plated, warty, or smooth. But best of all are the words that shape the leaves: orbicular, cordate, cleft, reniform, and their veneration palmate and parallel, and tips acute, truncate, auriculate. Sufficiently provided, you may now go forth to the forests and the shady streets to see how the chaos of experience answers to catalog and category. Confusedly. The leaves of a single tree may differ among themselves more than they do from other species, so you have to find, all blandly says the book, an average leaf. Example, the catalpa in the book sprays out its leaves in whirls of 3 around the stem, the one in front of you, but rarely does, or somewhat, or almost. Maybe it's not catalpa. Dreadful doubt. It may be weeks before you see an elm, fan-like in form, a spruce that pyramids, a sweet gum spring up in steeple shape. Still, petitemptim, as Lucretius says, little by little, you start to learn. And learn as well maybe what language does, and how it does it, cutting across the world, not always at the joints, competing with experience while cooperating with experience, and keeping an obstinate intransigence uncanny of its own. Think finally about the secret will, pretending obedience to nature, but individuously distinguishing everywhere, dividing up the world to conquer it. And think also how funny knowledge is. You may succeed in learning many trees and calling off their names as you go by, but their comprehensive silence stays the same. Okay, so this is a great poem for the Magician in that my personal interpretation of the Magician, yes, it is self-mastery. It is this ability to draw information from above and below, there's also kind of this in-between place about the magician that lends itself to my interpretation. So before I go even deeper into the poem, we're going to look at the cards real quick. This is the Rider-Waite-Smith Magician, and there's a lot of classical symbols going on here in this card. The magician wears white and red. Some people think this is reminiscent of the Templars, but whatever. He's got an Ouroboros belt, a snake biting its tail, representing infinity or something. The chalice, the pentacle, the sword, and the staff are on his table, representing his mastery over the domain of the elements, his ability to use all of these different tools in such a way that he is their master, that he understands the secrets of these different elements and how to put them to their best use. And finally, pointing down, also pointing up, that means that he is the liminal space between, as above, so below. That's my personal interpretation. Since he knows the secrets of realms on high, he also understands that those correlate and correspond metaphorically, actually, mysteriously, to the things of the earthly realm. Again, I think that a lot of people focus on and dwell upon the aspect of mastery over all of these different things, but I really usually see the magician as kind of a messenger of between these two realms. He's also associated with Mercury, and Mercury is the Roman equivalent of Hermes, and Hermes was the messenger of the gods, the go-between. There's a lot of metaphors you can unpack with that, but using the Night Sun tarot deck, this magician is really cool. I think he's one of my favorite magicians because he's in a trance-like state. He's got these prayer beads coming out of his mouth, which is kind of this metaphor for prayers, like being the mouthpiece of the gods. He does have all of the tools before him, but he's looking upward in a trance-like state. And it's just such a groovy, cool, spooky card, and it really points to the mysticism that I appreciate a lot more than the occult magician. I don't see a magician here, I see a mystic, I see a prophet, a dedicant. And yeah, I think that prophets are not supposed to be the people of self-mastery. They're supposed to be the in-between between deity and the earthly realms. So, and to my horror, I cannot find my Universal Fantasy deck. I moved probably 2 months ago, and you know how it takes like 6 months for everything to finally settle into one place when you move. So I have a lot of stuff. But instead, I'm going to be using the Line Strider Tarot Magician. This magician is really neat because it is not a human, it is a primate, and it is, I think, very fitting to be that link in between the animal and the human world. There's less focus on all of the accoutrement of the magician. The animal is still holding the wand, and he does still have or she still has a coin attached to the finger. There is still the infinity symbol. No, not infinity. There's a different word for it. It's the limniscate. Limniscate. The infinity symbol above the head, symbolizing this connection to the divine. And so it's this really, there's a lot of motion, there's a lot of movement in this card, and I really, really appreciate that because the magician is usually depicted standing very still, but being able to go in between those two realms of thought, of divine and worldly knowledge, is indicative of movement. So I really appreciate this magician card. So going back to the poem and my weird interpretation of the magician, there are two different kinds of, yeah, my fuzzies coupon. There are two different kinds of knowledge. Well, there's lots of different kinds of knowledge, actually. So there is techne. Theodore Roszak came up with this idea of a technocracy, which is a society ruled by technical knowledge. Specialized professionals who know exactly what they're doing in their niche demographic study field. So, but we get techne from Aristotle, from the Greeks, and techne is a technical knowledge. A doctor has a technical knowledge of the human body. He also, or she, has a technique of fixing the body, of being able to engage with the body. It's a very technical thing, and it requires experience, it requires practice, and it requires honing this knowledge that you have into a technical knowledge. Whereas like Sophitia is just wisdom. It is the kind of more broader umbrella term of knowledge, of knowing. It's a wisdom. Other languages have really clear, distinct, I'm thinking of French, connaître and savoir. We have a knowledge of how to do something, and we have a general knowledge of how to do something. So I think that with the poem and with the magician, before you can learn the trees, you have to learn the language of the trees. And so you have to have this technical knowledge. You have to understand how to engage with the world. You have to have this praxis, this ability to engage with the world around you. And that requires study. It requires book learning. And out of this book, which now that you think of it is one of the transformations of a tree. And so that's kind of this Ouroboros idea that even though we are studying a technical knowledge, that technical knowledge has come from a broader outside world. It has come back to you, and it's sort of this Ouroboros idea that everything returns upon itself. The words themselves are a delight to learn. I think everybody gets excited when they embark on a new journey of learning. Whenever we recall when we first picked up a alternative spirituality book, we were like, this is special, this is really cool, and I can't wait to learn all these things. And when you do learn them, it's exciting, and it's new, and it's fresh, and it's awesome. And then once you've got that technical knowledge, you go out into the world, and it's, what? Why isn't this working out? This is also a grotesquely oversimplified metaphor for the higher education system. I mean, you get a specialized knowledge and you go out into the real world, and that doesn't mean anything because you have no experience. So that in and of itself is kind of a doubting thing. It's kind of a like, oops, whoa, this is a human moment. This is not divinely inspired. This is not technical knowledge. This is this in-between place of this leap of faith over the chasm of doubt, and it's like, fuck, what do I do? And, you know, I really appreciate how Nemirov has, like, maybe it's not Catalpa, dreadful doubt. That's one sentence, dreadful doubt. And it's like, it is, it's dreadful. But eventually he starts talking about language in and of itself, and how it cuts across the world, not always at the joints, competing with experience while cooperating with experience, and keeping an obstinate intransigence uncanny of its own. So language in and of itself is this really cool thing, and it defies definition because it is constantly growing, constantly evolving. Grammar are the nails in which we try to nail a raw egg against a tree, and the raw egg is language. Like, language can't be pinned down by grammar or by vocabulary because it's a constantly growing and evolving thing. So, going back to the magician, I don't think that the magician is something that can be pinned down. I think that the magician is language. I think that the magician is the go-between. It's the, instead of being yang or yin, it's the line that divides but also brings together the two. I know that kind of obliterates a duality system by like plopping in another thing, but you could also think of it as not heads or tails, but the side of the coin. There's a lot going on in the magician that speaks to being the vessel, the channel through which experience comes to us, and which we engage with the world and make experience. That we make technical knowledge, and that technical knowledge is recursive and comes back and teaches us. So yeah, the magician is really, really cool, and my final word would be the magician is language, the vessel through which we engage this world, I think. So one last final note is the last stanza, and think also how funny knowledge is. You may succeed in learning many trees and calling off their names as you go by, but their comprehensive silence stays the same. So I think that speaks to this sort of human vanity, that we can have everything figured out, that we can know all the names of the trees and we can identify all of them, and we can know that, but that's just us pushing meaning and knowledge onto something else. It's our perspective and it's our epistemology, it's our making sense of the world, but it's still coming from us. It's not an engagement with the world. I mean, we do have engagement with experience, but it's still us projecting and proclaiming what X is onto something that might actually be Y, or it might be Z. So I think that that's kind of also an important lesson for the magician. The magician is great for your ego, to boost all of that, but also maybe the lesson of the magician might be that we are kind of just making up things, that there's nothing intrinsic in language. Language is a human construct. So yeah, anyways. All right, this video has been all over the place, but I appreciate you watching it, getting this far. If you liked it, please leave a comment below your thoughts, opinions of the poem, different poems that could have worked, your opinion of the magician. I really enjoy your comments. It's how I grow as a person who wants to see this community grow. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.